Lecture 42 is more about the Muslims and their unity and disunity. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the Sufis here. And then we'll get into, I think the most important part of it is the radical element and where that comes from. And that's where I did my dissertation in the context of Pakistan. But where does Sufi come from? It probably comes from the word suf, which means wool. And the fact that Sufism exists at all is somewhat of a rebuke to orthodoxy. This is what Abdul Rahman, the Pakistani who taught at the University of Chicago for a while, a moderate Muslim. One of my friends did his PhD under him. He was more or less chased out of Pakistan for his moderate views. He says that Sufism critiques orthodoxy. Rahman is gone now, by the way. But he the emphasis here is the purifying of Islam. In other words, how do you purify yourself? So that's Sufi emphasis. Emphasizing yourself. How do you get your own heart right? And there is a warmth here. There's an emotion. Sufis were basically tired. Sick of the old dry old Sharia. And so you can appreciate that, can't you? That there is a desire for warmth, for emotion. There has been some revivalism among Sufis. There is this Sufi path. Wherever you go in the Muslim world, you can run into a Sufi brotherhood. So keep your eyes open and ask questions of what kind of Sufism is here and what brotherhood. The Sufis have their own scripture verses that they like very much. One of them is 5 and 54. That is that, O you who believe, if any from among you turn back from his faith, soon will Allah produce a people whom, listen to this, he will love as they will love him. They love this. Sufis stress the relationship end of it. They do talk an awful lot about their love for God, whereas we would emphasize God's love for us. We love him because he first loved us, whereas they spend an awful lot of time talking about how much they love him. And by all appearances, it seems that they do love him. Another verse that they refer to and they use all the time is 2 and 115. And this verse says that wherever you turn, there is the love, there is the Allah's countenance. To Allah belongs the east and the west. Whithersoever you turn, there is Allah's face, his countenance. He's all embracing. You see, that's 1, 2 that they like. God is here, not here so much, but he's closer by than the Muslims ordinarily recognize or talk about. One person that we could mention is Al-Hallaj, who got into this Sufism in the 10th century, and he he had the various steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, where you get closer to God and you become like God. He went too far. Al-Hallaj said, basically, I'm one with God and I am God. So he then was stoned for that blasphemy. So then for a while it went underground until the time of Al-Ghazali. Ibn Arabi, on the other hand, talked about being one with Muhammad. Muhammad is really the one that they sing about, and if you go to the shrines oftentimes, the saints, they're singing Qawwalis, Quvali, is a song about Muhammad. You know, they don't sing in the mosque, but they do sing in the shrine about Muhammad. And so Muhammad, in some ways, gets their love and affection in this sense. Ibn Arabi is talking about one with Muhammad. In the 18th century, the Tariqa Brotherhood in North Africa, where one of the studies that I've read is by Valerie Hoffman, who did quite a work in North Africa as an anthropologist, and was saying how that they more or less become annihilated in Muhammad. So Sufism is extreme. Sufism is popular Islam, but you'd wonder how in the world other Muslims who claim to be Orthodox can put up with it. And basically, they do put up with it. It's almost like they have learned to live with it, and they're side by side because Sufism is so prevalent. It is so prevalent among Muslims. Now let's leave the Sufis. We could talk. There could be a course on the Sufis, and just spend our time on that, because you can get videos of it. You can get there's so much material on the Sufis. We have, I think, 5 or 6 mosques here in Colombia. At least 2 of them, to my understanding, are Sufi mosques. Oftentimes, I think that when people become Muslim in this country, the blacks would come through the door of the Nation of Islam, because they listen to the rhetoric of Louis Farrakhan and his ability to talk and so on. But the whites who become Muslim would come through the door of Sufism, I guess because of the warmth. They talk about relationship with God more than other Muslims. Now the Ahmadiyya, we have mentioned him already. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, 1835 to 1908. They were, as mentioned before, the Jehovah's Witnesses in Islam. They used to oppose me and oppose every missionary. They've written a lot of apologetic stuff, polemic stuff. Sometimes it seems like other Muslims take their material and use it against Christians. There was one apologist by the name of Ahmed Didat in South Africa who was very vigorous, aggressive, and wicked in his attacks against Christianity. It seemed that he was using the material of Ahmadiyyas, so polemic stuff. And the Ahmadiyyas used to say, for some reason, they had this idea that Jesus had died up in Kashmir. They used to say this to me. I don't know what proof they had, but they said that he swooned. He didn't die on the cross. He swooned, and he died in Kashmir, and his grave was up there. I never went up there to look for it. I mentioned that the reason why the Ahmadiyyas are not liked, were rejected, is because Mirza Ghulam Ahmad acted like he had received special revelation, wahi, and that is a no-no, because Muhammad was the last prophet, and there cannot be another prophet after him. He was the seal of the prophets, so you cannot have anything after that. They were outside the realm of Orthodox Islam. The Ahmadiyyas, they're small in number. They have spread, but they have broken up into 2 parts as well. One was in Pakistan. I think one was the Qadiani, and I'm not sure exactly what the other one is. But it has been a group that has been persecuted. In 1953, thanks to Maulana Maududi, who wrote the Qadiani Question, because that's where Mirza Ghulam Ahmad came from. There was quite a bit of opposition began then, and then non-Muslim in 1974. They have been quite active in their missionary work all over the world, West Africa, wherever you go. These JWs of Islam have been very, very active and, as mentioned, persecuted a great deal. But I think open somewhat to at least discussion. One of a good friend in Pakistan was an Ahmadiyya. Let's talk a little bit about the Alawites. These are found in Syria. They're descendants of Ali, and some pagan influences there, and Ismaili influences, quite a mixture really. Apparently some Kurds. You know that if you look at the Kurds are all over the place. They're in northern Iraq, they're in Turkey, and they've suffered a great deal by the Turks in history. We had a very good Kurdish friend in Southern California from Iran. He heard an awful lot of gospel, but to our knowledge, he never really came to faith. Apparently some Kurds are Alawites. They claim that Ali is the incarnation of the divine, if you could imagine. And the leader of the in Syria, a guy by the name of Hassad, is an Alawite. They're very much into allegorical interpretations of the Quran. Again, they read into it. And the Muslim Brotherhood have hated them. They've opposed them very, very much. You see how disunified the Muslim world is. The only thing that brings them together is when they have a common enemy. Then there's the Druze. Like the Ahmadiyyas, these are heretics, secretive, esoteric group. They accepted one of the caliphs, Caliph al-Hakam, who died in 1021, and said that he was the manifestation of God. They hold to the transmigration of the soul. Sounds like Hinduism in that sense. 600,000 of them, mostly in Lebanon, but you also have the Druze in Syria and Israel, and they have been at odds with the Maronite Christians, and you have had so much civil war in Lebanon where these two groups have been battling one another for many, many years. And I hear that recently they are more open to the gospel, where years ago you would never hear of a convert, never hear of someone coming to Christ from the Druze. Nevertheless, now, today, there is talk of Druze coming to Christ, so we praise God for that. They have a great interest in eschatology as well, in the disappearing and the coming again of the Messiah or the Mahdi. Again, it's not always sure the difference between the Mahdi and the Messiah, but they have in their eschatology that someone is coming back again. Now let's talk about radical Islam, which is really what I wanted to get into. This is where I did my dissertation in this subject, wrote on radical Islam. I called it fundamentalist Islam in Pakistan, and how this is affecting the progress of the gospel. I interviewed 32 former Muslims, and came to the conclusion that Muslims are coming to Christ not despite or in spite of fundamentalist Islam, but because of it. In other words, what Muslims are doing, radical Muslims, is actually driving more and more Muslims to Christ. And I think this is going to happen. I think we can see it. We have to believe that God is using the wrath of man to praise him. When I did my study, I used one of the resources of a guy by the name of Dekmejian, an Armenian, and I think he teaches at the University of New York, if I'm not mistaken. But you can look at the class notes and see all of the references there. One of the things that this article that I have there, Islam and Terrorism, a closer look. There's also other stuff, but the Al-Muhajirun, my book I've referred to, Islamic Ideology and Fundamentalism in Pakistan, Climate for Conversion to Christianity. This book now is very, very expensive because the University Press of America is, an academic publishing place, and so they set their own price on it. It's basically priced it out of print. The Muslim Brotherhood is the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and there are other groups too in the Middle East that have sprung from the MBs, Muslim Brotherhood. In Pakistan today, you have many, many organizations. They're Al-Qaeda affiliates. And that's one thing about Al-Qaeda. It is, there's no really one, I think, headship. And perhaps even now as we speak, Osama bin Laden is becoming less and less important. But radicalization of Islam has taken place, and there is evidence for it all over the place. What are the catalysts of fundamentalism? I've sometimes been told that, you shouldn't use this word fundamentalism because it is a pejorative word. And it is true that in the West it is a pejorative word. When you think of fundamentalism here, to call somebody a fundamentalist Christian is really a put down because of the history here and the narrowness, the bigotry, and so on with which one has looked at fundamentalists. And so they left the term fundamentalist and became evangelicals. You had the idea that there was this fighting fundamentalist. Well, in Islam, I think the word fundamentalist, we have to take it on its own terms. Fundamentalism was sort of the idea of back to Islam, back to the Quran, sort of back to the Bible movement, and certainly not all radical, but there were radical elements of it. I did a study and came up with about some fathers of fundamentalism. I named Al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb and Maulana Maududi. I could have named Al-Tamiya, who really way back got this going, but I didn't go back that far, but came up with various catalysts. In other words, what is causing this movement of radical Islam, or whatever you want to call it? One, I think, is local conditions. Local conditions in many Muslim settings has been less than favorable. For example, the way that the Egyptian government has oppressed and persecuted people in their situation has really, I think, spawned the movement. If you can't give people an opportunity to say something against the government, then I think you're really asking for trouble. And so the Egyptian government has had this policy. I know it's a delicate balance, but local conditions have certainly contributed to radical Islam. That's one of the things I said. And then I said another thing is success. Success. What kind of success? Well, Muslims have had some remarkable successes, and we can name some of them. For instance, they managed, they think more or less single-handedly, to drive out the former Soviet Union from Afghanistan. The truth is, they received an awful lot of arms, ammunition from the United States and others, because at that time we were very much into the Cold War, and we wanted the Soviet Union to be destroyed, and we knew that they had encroached in Afghanistan, so we did our best to funnel our resources, military and stuff, through the ISI, which is the intelligence group in Pakistan, and they in turn supported all of the elements in Afghanistan that called themselves freedom fighters. They were really, extremist Muslims, and they fulfilled our purpose, and they drove out the Soviet army, and then they turned against us. We really didn't, at the time, we didn't realize, at least we weren't smart enough and not astute enough to realize what was happening. But we did fund them, and of course then we've had trouble with them ever since. And of course then one other mistake we made was that when the war was won in Afghanistan, then we pulled out and left Pakistan in the lurch. But the Muslims say, you know, we did it, we won. And they'll say, just like the Battle of Badr in 624, when Muhammad said God did it, when the Muslim forces beat the Meccan forces who outnumbered them, they said, in reference to the Soviet Union, when they pushed them out, they said, God did it, we won. Another catalyst has been trauma. There's been a lot of trauma in Muslim settings, civil war, you know, poverty, and even, for instance, going back to Afghanistan, the fact that the Taliban were able to take over was true in part because of the trouble that existed there, the disruption, the lawlessness that existed, and the Taliban came over and they dealt severely with some of those cases that there seemed that there was no one to stop the crime and the injustice and kidnapping people and girls and one thing or another, and the Taliban took over, and so they eventually took over more and more, and they gained power and eventually took over the whole country, and then we were able to drive them back. But now they're across the border and making good progress in Pakistan, so they're still a great threat to the region. The West has been a catalyst. The West has been it has been something that has driven Muslims often to be better Muslims. Often radical Muslims have had a taste of the West. When you look at Sayyid Qutb, who spent a couple of years here, 1948 to 50, or any of them, I mean, they have seen the West and rejected it. Maulana Maududi warned of the West. He felt that the West in its moral corruption was dangerous. They were not happy with secular society, and they felt that religion was minimized. They didn't see very much that they were happy with. And so the West has, and of course, I suppose the fact that 9/10 of the world, Muslim world, was colonized. So the West took them over, and eventually they won back their freedom. But they've always put the West with Christianity, and they look back on the Crusades 1,000 years ago, and that was too. They look with the West. You know, these were Western countries, and in the colonization and so on. Another catalyst has been outside influences. When Iran pulled off the Islamic Revolution in 1979, it electrified the Muslim world. Had it been an Arab country, I think it would have even gone much further. But this was Shiite Muslim. They were Persian, not Arab, and so it didn't go so far. But nevertheless, it was a success story. The Ayatollah Khomeini came back out of exile, and he ruled. The Shah of Iran was run out, the secularist, the friend of the United States, and the United States has supported dictators. He was gone. This was something else. And then, lastly, I think, historical anchors. Muslims can look back in their history and say, at such a time of history, we rallied. We had a revival. Whether it was the Wahhabis or whatever it was, reformist movements, they can look back in their history and say that we did it. We made a return to Islam, and we can do it again. So there are those issues that they're catalysts of if Islamic fundamentalism. I've named some of them here. Again, the Muslim Brotherhood, actually the Arabic name is Ikhwan al-Muslimin. And then a book that we mention here, written by Mitchell, Society of the Muslim Brotherhood, when he does definitive work on the Muslim Brotherhood, where they came from. Here is the name of al-Banna, the founder, 1928, and Sayyid Qutb, who was the theoretician. He was the brains. He was the sickly man who, with a powerful pen, who wrote, and he inspired Muslims today. I mean, the rhetoric of both Banna and Qutb was tremendous. They inspired people. They gave them, somehow they gave Muslims a faith in themselves and faith in Islam. Both of them were executed. Banna in 48, and no, not 48. Qutb was executed in 66, and al-Banna just, before that. Now, here are a couple of verses we'll mention just as we close. There is one verse here in 2 and 190. Let's see, 2 and 190. Fight in the cause of Allah. You see, this is the verse, one of the verses that the radical Muslims choose. They like it. I've mentioned before that you can get out of the Quran what you want to. You can get out of the Quran the warm, fuzzy stuff. Christians were dearest in affection, but you can also get out of the Quran verses like this. Fight against them. See, Allah loveth not transgressors. And slay them, 191. Wherever you catch them, turn them out, and from there where you've turned out. From tumult and oppression and worse than slaughter, but fight them not at the sacred mosque unless they first fight you there. Now, I think this is This is in reference to the Meccans back in history, but Muslims use it today. The radical Muslims, they always quote here, "Fight them on until there is no more tumult or oppression," in 193. You see, so that's one of them. But then the other verses too that they love to use are the sword verses, such as 9 and verse 5. Which is says, "With the forbidden months are past, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them." This is also historical context. "Seize them, beleaguer them, lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war, but if they repent and establish regular prayers and practice regular charity, then open is a way for them. For Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful." And then over to 9 and 29. "Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden." You see, so there are these verses that extremist Muslims will use, and they'll use them quite freely. I think I've mentioned that the Quran, like 5 and 32, is one that Muslims, moderate Muslims, love to repeat. It says that if anyone slew a person, unless it be for murder or for spreading mischief in the land, it would be as if he slew the whole people. Now that's a great verse. You'll hear Muslims use this. In fact, President Obama used this verse recently in Cairo, at the University of Cairo, when he spoke. But the next verse is not so gentle. "The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and his messenger, and strive with might and main for mischief through the land, is" what? "Execution or crucifixion, cutting off the hands and feet from the opposite sides, or exile." So you see, that's what I mean when I say that the Quran, you can use the Quran for whatever position you want to take.